Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The bill that reopened the government also includes a temporary extension of a landmark cyber information law. The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015 expired on October 1st. Now it's in force again, at least until January 30th. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me with more on what could be a complicated reauthorization path for CISA 2015. Justin, thanks for being here.
Hey, Terry, thanks for having me.
Were you surprised to see at least an interim reauthorization for this in the continuing resolution?
It wasn't a big surprise because there was another short-term extension tacked on to the original CR that passed the House back in September. And then, of course, we had this very, very long shutdown debates for the last month and a half. But once they came up with a new CR in the Senate, folks were quickly looking for this CISA 2015 extension, and lo and behold, there it was. So once again, CISA 2015 will be the law of the land at least until January 30th.
So what are people saying about the short-term extension? Did it include any new provisions? Is it just business as usual?
It's just a clean extension, as you might call it. Essentially, it just extends the terms of the original law for another 2.5 months without changing anything about the law itself. And so folks are very happy that there is this law now in force again. There was a lot of concern that the longer that this lapse lasted, it would degrade cybersecurity information sharing because companies would face more legal risks for sharing that cyber data. So people are excited that it's back in place and are applauding that. But at the same time, they're warning, look, we can't be in this situation again come January. There needs to be a longer term fix.
Well, did we see any impact of the breakdown in CISA cooperation provisions? Were there any impacts to show during the lapse?
What folks told me is that while information sharing still happened during the lapse, it slowed down. And that's because the information that companies would normally share that would be protected by the provisions of CISA 2015, these liability and privacy protections, now that information had to go through some extra layers of legal review because you didn't have those blanket protections in place. And so while, folks like CISA Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity, Nick Anderson, he was saying at the end of October that information sharing was holding steady. But folks told me that the reintroduction of legal review into these individual decisions about whether to share cyber threat indicators, that slowed it down, and it was going to start having the kind of cumulative effect of reducing information sharing over time.
Well, before the shutdown and prior to the lapse in this authorization, a lot of people were talking about the need to reform the CISA Act before a new authorization came into place. Where does that stand now that Congress is back in session?
Well, it's complicated. The calls for reform are still there. In the House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Andrew Garbarino has put forward a bill called the Widespread Information Management for the Welfare of Infrastructure and Government Act. It's a mouthful, but essentially it is a 10-year CISA 2015 reauthorization that does include some updates, updates definitions to account for advances in artificial intelligence and the fact that AI will need to be secured, and it's creating complications for cybersecurity. It would also require the Department of Homeland Security to improve its outreach to industry on emerging cyber threats. And it would include all of the provisions, the protections that were already in place, starting with CISA 2015. That's in the House. That's passed the Homeland Security Committee. It's waiting for a full vote on the House floor. In the Senate, it's much more complicated because Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee Chairman Rand Paul is opposed to any sort of CISA 2015 reauthorization that doesn't include some sort of amendment that prohibits or forbids the government from essentially working on disinformation efforts. This is essentially one of Senator Paul's big issues is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, also called CISA, had been working with social media companies to tamp down disinformation, especially around the 2020 election and the pandemic. Senator Paul and other conservatives have considered that tantamount to infringing on the First Amendment. And so this is one of his big issues. Cyber experts tell me that essentially it's conflating a separate law with CISA, the agency, and CISA, the agency's disinformation efforts have nothing to do with the information sharing protections in the law. But the bottom line is Senator Paul is essentially going to be something of a roadblock to a lot of bipartisan reauthorization efforts that otherwise would move forward. And so the question is, does Senator Paul get his way and have some sort of debate over the First Amendment as part of this reauthorization? Or does Senate Majority Leader John Thune essentially do an end around Senator Paul to get this over the finish line?
It sounds like that'll be a tricky conference negotiation when it finally happens,
to say the least. And the other big deal is whether, House Representative Andrew Garbarino's bill is the one that kind of moves forward with those changes, or whether a quote-unquote clean reauthorization moves forward. That's what's been put forward by Senator Gary Peters and Mike Rounds. That would just extend the law without any changes for another 10 years. So there's a lot swirling around in Congress with the future of this law.
Has the White House said what its position is on reauthorizing CISA 2015?
The White House, when they've talked about it, has said that they want a clean reauthorization, like the bill that Senator Peters is championing. The White House National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross has said multiple times that the White House is pushing for a 10-year clean reauthorization. He's called it a common sense law, and it's something that the White House wants to have done. The big question is, that's National Cyber Director Sean Cairncross, certainly an important figure, but does this become a bigger issue for the White House beyond the cyber office? Is this something that the White House writ large throws its weight around? It's a little bit of an in-the-weeds issue. It's not necessarily something that you could see President Trump posting about on Truth Social, but does the White House wade into this debate more forcefully as Congress considers reauthorization efforts? That's something that we have yet to see.
Well, given the holiday schedule, January 30th isn't really that far away. So maybe a simple approach to the reauthorization is the most likely to succeed.
I think that's why you see, folks like Sean Cairncross saying, let's just do a clean reauthorization and move forward.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.